Have you ever imagined what it would feel like to see someone you loved and lost after 20 long years? This is exactly what happened to Michael Jordan on a glittering night in Chicago. The world's greatest basketball legend walked into a charity gala expecting cameras, applause, and handshakes. But instead, he froze, because across the room stood his ex-wife Juanita, the woman he hadn't seen in 2 decades. Their eyes met, the crowd fell silent, and what happened next stunned everyone who witnessed it. Chicago's night skyline glittered like a crown of diamonds, the city buzzing with life as limousines and SUVs lined up outside one of its most prestigious hotels. Inside, the grand ballroom looked like a scene carved out of a dream. Crystal chandeliers dripping golden light, tables dressed in silk linens, and the air thick with the mingling scents of champagne and expensive cologne. Jazz hummed from a live band, the soft rhythm weaving a soundtrack for the city's elite gathered tonight. At the heart of it all was Michael Jordan. He stood tall in a tailored black tuxedo, his broad shoulders carrying the quiet authority of a man who had once ruled the basketball world. Even retired, even decades past his glory days, his presence bent the air around him. Heads turned wherever he walked, whispers trailing him like shadows. But for Michael, this was just another gala. Another night of shaking hands, signing checks, smiling for cameras. Charity had become second nature. He sipped his sparkling water, already rehearsing the short speech he'd deliver later. It was routine, safe, controlled. And then it happened. A figure caught his eye across the ballroom. A woman in a midnight blue gown, her posture regal, her presence unmistakable even from behind. Michael's gaze lingered longer than it should have, something in his chest tightening. He frowned slightly, trying to place the feeling. Then she turned, and his world tilted. The chatter of the ballroom blurred, the clink of glasses and soft laughter faded, and all he could see was her face, her eyes, her smile. Juanita, his ex-wife, the woman he had once built an entire life with, the mother of his children, the woman he hadn't spoken to in nearly 20 years. Michael froze. The glass in his hand trembled. His heart, steady through countless buzzer beaters and championship games, suddenly stumbled. For a heartbeat, he wondered if it was a trick of the light, a ghost conjured by memory. But no, this was real, flesh and blood. Her eyes met his, and everything stopped. Shock flickered across her face, the same disbelief etched in his own. Her lips parted slightly, her hand pausing midair with her glass of wine. In that moment, the 20 years that separated them dissolved into nothing. It was as if time itself had bent, collapsing the years into this single heartbeat. Guests around them began to notice. A reporter whispered to her colleague, "Wait, is that his ex-wife? After all these years?" Another guest leaned closer to his partner, their eyes widening. Phones lifted discreetly, cameras ready. Something bigger than charity was unfolding. Michael's chest rose and fell uneven. This wasn't the adrenaline of a championship. This was fear, longing, regret. His mind flashed with memories, her laughter echoing in their old home, the soft moments of support after a crushing loss, the fiery arguments that split them apart. Signing the divorce papers, walking away, believing it was forever. And now, 20 years later, here she was. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. Then somehow he did. Placing his glass down with a trembling hand, Michael took a step forward. Then another. The marble floor beneath his polished shoes seemed to echo like thunder in his ears. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. When he finally reached her, the air between them felt electric. "Juanita," he said softly, his voice lower, heavier than he intended. She blinked, her chest rising as though she, too, had forgotten how to breathe. Michael, just his name, but the way she said it, half whisper, half exhale, carried the weight of 2 decades. Neither spoke for a long moment. The music swelled, conversations resumed around them, but in their world, there was silence. Up close, Michael noticed the changes in her. The grace of time etched faintly around her eyes, the maturity in her posture. But she was still Juanita, still the woman he had loved, fought with, lost. "It's been a long time," she said finally, her voice calm but trembling at the edges. Michael's jaw tightened. Too long. The words weren't polished, weren't planned. They came raw, stripped bare, carrying everything he couldn't say out loud. Her lips curved, the faintest ghost of a smile, and it hit him harder than any opponent ever had. The crowd was no longer pretending. They were openly watching now, whispering, speculating, recording. But Michael didn't care. He wasn't the icon right now. He wasn't his airness. He was just a man, standing face to face with the chapter of his life he thought had closed forever. And as their eyes locked, one undeniable truth burned in his mind. This wasn't an accident. This was destiny knocking. And everyone in that ballroom, every guest, every reporter, every whispering spectator, could feel it. The only question left was, what happens next? The music in the ballroom carried on, but Michael Jordan barely heard it. Standing face to face with Juanita, it felt like he had stepped out of the present and into a reel of memories that refused to stop playing. Her eyes, they hadn't changed. They were the same eyes that had looked at him from courtside as he made impossible shots. The same eyes that had narrowed in frustration when he came home late from practice. The same eyes that once lit up when their children first walked, first talked, first called him Dad. And now those same eyes were staring at him again, full of something he couldn't quite name. Michael blinked, but the images kept coming. He was back in 1989, freshly crowned a superstar, his smile wider than the world as he carried Juanita into their first home. She laughed then, a carefree, bubbling sound that filled every corner of the empty house. They had painted the walls themselves, staying up late, splashing each other with color, building a life brick by brick. Then another memory, sharp and jagged, arguments behind closed doors, voices raised, words flung like weapons. Nights where silence filled the house heavier than thunder. He remembered Juanita sitting on the edge of the bed, her face turned away, tears falling silently. And he remembered himself, too proud, too stubborn, unable to close the distance. Now, 20 years later, he wished he had. "Michael," Juanita said, pulling him back to the present. Her voice was steadier this time, layered with something he couldn't place. "Why are you here?" He almost laughed at the irony. "Why am I here? Why are you here?" Her lips curved, but it wasn't humor. It was something else, bitterness maybe, or disbelief. "I was invited, just like you." Their words hung in the air, simple but heavy. Around them, conversations swirled, glasses clinked, and yet people still stole glances their way. They were the spectacle tonight. Not the charity, not the million-dollar donations. Them. Michael's gaze drifted to the stage where a slideshow of smiling children played. Kids whose futures would be changed by the donations raised tonight. The sight jolted another wave of memories. He saw his own children, Jeffrey, Marcus, Jasmine. Tiny hands holding his, their laughter filling the home. Then he saw them older, caught in the crossfire of divorce, confused, hurt. He swallowed hard. He hadn't just lost Juanita. He had lost a piece of himself when their marriage ended. Juanita followed his gaze, and for a moment, her expression softened too. She whispered, almost to herself, "They're grown now, living their own lives." Michael nodded. "Yeah, but it doesn't feel that long ago." Their eyes met again, and for the briefest of seconds, they weren't exes, they weren't strangers. They were two parents, bonded forever by the children they had raised. But the moment passed, and the weight of 20 years of silence pressed between them. Michael shifted slightly, trying to regain his composure. He was used to pressure, to cameras, to being watched by millions. But this was different. This was a battle inside his own chest. He lowered his voice. "Do you ever think maybe things could have been different?" Juanita's breath caught. She glanced away, her hand tightening around her glass. When she finally looked back, her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with a depth that shook him. "Every day," she admitted softly. The words hit him like a blow. For a second, Michael's mask cracked, his vulnerability naked under the ballroom lights. The crowd couldn't hear their words, but they didn't need to. They could feel the tension radiating, electric and uncontainable. The whispers grew louder. A photographer shifted closer. Michael leaned in slightly, lowering his voice further, his tone almost pleading. "Then why does it feel like fate just put us in the same room again?" Juanita didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him, as though searching for something in his face. Truth, regret, maybe even hope. Finally, she shook her head, her voice trembling. "Because fate has a cruel sense of humor." Michael exhaled slowly, his chest tight. The line stung, but he couldn't deny the pull. 20 years hadn't erased it. If anything, seeing her again only made it stronger. The jazz band shifted songs, the tempo slower now, more romantic. A few couples moved to the dance floor. And for one reckless second, Michael almost asked her to dance. Almost reached out, almost bridged the 20-year gap with a single gesture. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he stepped back, his expression guarded again, though his heart pounded. "Maybe fate isn't done with us," he murmured. Juanita's lips parted, but she said nothing. Her silence was louder than any answer. And in that silence, the entire room leaned in. Because everyone knew this wasn't just an encounter. This was the spark of something bigger, unfinished business, raw emotions, the kind of tension that could change everything. The gala carried on, but for Michael and Juanita, time had fractured. The past had broken through the present, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. The only question that mattered now was whether they would face it or run from it again. The crowd slowly drifted back to their conversations, though the air remained charged, like static before a storm. The orchestra picked up again, but the melody felt hollow, a background score to something more powerful happening in the room. Michael and Juanita stood just off to the side, away from the cameras now but not away from the whispers. Every step they took together drew eyes, as if the entire gala were holding its breath. Michael's chest was tight. It wasn't nerves from the spotlight. He had lived in that spotlight for most of his life. No, this was different. This was personal. Juanita broke the silence first. "So, how've you been?" The question was simple, almost casual, but it hit him harder than he expected. 20 years compressed into 4 words. Michael let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I've been surviving, thriving, maybe, depending on the day." Juanita nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "And always busy, I'm sure." Busy. That word hung between them, heavy with memory. Busy with games, with endorsements, with the endless machine that had turned a man into an empire. Busy with everything except the marriage. Michael shifted, his jaw tightening. "You know how it was. You knew me better than anyone. The schedule, the pressure, the everything." "I did," she said, her voice calm but edged. "I knew exactly what it cost. And not just you." Her words landed like a punch. He didn't need her to explain. He remembered the nights he came home long after midnight, his mind still on the court. He remembered the arguments, whispered at first, then louder, then in silence. He remembered the children, watching the distance grow between their parents. For a moment his mind pulled him back. The flashback was vivid. A kitchen table, late at night, Juanita sitting across from him, her face tired but resolute. "Michael, we can't keep living like this." His response had been silence, the weight of the NBA on his shoulders, but none heavier than the look in her eyes that night. The memory faded, but the ache remained. Michael blinked, dragging himself back to the present. "Juanita, he started but stopped. Words felt impossible, too heavy to lift. Juanita studied him carefully. She had always been able to read him, even when he thought he was hiding behind the mask of the competitor. "You don't need to explain, Michael. Not here. Not tonight." But the restraint in her tone made it worse. It wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was something quieter, more painful, acceptance. Michael's throat tightened. For a man who had conquered every arena, this was the one place he had no control. He glanced at the crowd around them, the cameras still lurking, waiting for another spark. His instincts screamed to pull back, to guard his image, to keep everything sealed behind the legend's wall. But the man inside him, the one she had once loved, wanted to break through. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I never stopped thinking about you." Juanita's expression flickered, the first crack in her calm exterior. It was there for only a heartbeat, then gone. But Michael saw it. The orchestra swelled. The gala host called for attention on stage, announcing the next round of donations. The room shifted again, giving them cover, but the moment between them remained raw and alive. Juanita exhaled slowly, her eyes locked on his. "Then maybe tonight. It's time we finally talk." Michael felt the words cut through the noise, through the years, through everything. For the first time all night, he wasn't sure if he was ready. But he knew he had no choice, because this wasn't just a reunion. This was the past demanding to be faced. The host's voice boomed from the stage, pulling the crowd's attention back to the gala, at least for a moment. Laughter returned. Champagne glasses clinked again. But Michael and Juanita remained standing at the edge of the ballroom, caught in their own orbit. Michael leaned closer, his voice steady but low. "Not here. Too many eyes." Juanita glanced at the cameras still lurking like vultures. Then she nodded once, her red gown gliding as she turned away. Without a word, she began walking toward a side corridor lined with portraits of past Chicago icons. Michael followed. The shift in atmosphere was instant. The noise of the ballroom dulled behind them, fading into a distant hum. Here, the air was cooler, quieter, almost reverent. The carpet muffled their steps, and the walls seemed to echo with history. A fitting backdrop for two people confronting their own. For a while, neither spoke. They walked side by side, the silence between them thick, layered with 20 years of unsaid words. Finally, Juanita stopped near a grand window overlooking the city lights. Her reflection shimmered against the glass, twin to her calm face. "So," she said, her tone sharp but even, "after all this time, what is it you want to say?" Michael stood a few feet away, his hands slipping into his pockets, his posture less like the legend everyone knew and more like a man caught in vulnerability. "I don't know where to start." "That's a first," Juanita replied dryly. "You always knew how to take control. On the court, in business, in life." She turned to face him fully. "Except with us." Her words weren't cruel, they were factual, precise, and they cut deeper than anger ever could. Michael's gaze dropped for a moment before lifting again. "I was young. I thought I could balance it all, the fame, the family, the pressure. I thought I was giving you everything by winning, by providing. But I didn't see what I was losing." Juanita's eyes softened, but only slightly. "You didn't see me. Not really. Not the way I needed you to." The honesty stung, but he didn't argue. For the first time in years, Michael Jordan wasn't defending himself. He was listening. Silence stretched between them again, heavy but necessary. Michael took a slow breath. "When I walked in tonight and saw you, it was like the last 20 years disappeared. Like I was back in that house, back with you. And I realized I never stopped carrying it." Juanita studied him. For a moment, the poised, untouchable woman she had become flickered, replaced by the girl he once knew. The one who had laughed with him in college apartments. The one who had believed in him before the world crowned him king. "You know what hurt the most?" she asked quietly. Michael shook his head. "Tell me." "It wasn't the distance. It wasn't the spotlight. It was knowing that even when you were next to me, I wasn't really there with you. The game always was." Her voice didn't break, but Michael felt the crack inside himself. He stepped closer, his voice low, earnest. "If I could change it." "But you can't," she interrupted gently, though not unkindly. "And I'm not asking you to. We're not those people anymore, Michael." Her words landed with finality, but not with bitterness. They were truth spoken without hate. Michael exhaled, feeling both the sting of loss and the strange relief of honesty. For the first time, they weren't hiding behind anger, silence, or tabloids. They were simply two people facing what had always been there. From the ballroom, the sound of applause swelled as a donation announcement was made. The world continued spinning. But in that quiet corridor, Time itself seemed to pause, leaving Michael and Juanita standing on the edge of past and present, unsure of which way to step. The applause from the ballroom faded into muffled echoes behind the heavy doors. In the quiet corridor, only the city lights bore witness as Michael and Juanita stood across from one another, their reflections shimmering faintly against the tall glass windows. For a long moment, neither spoke. Michael shifted, the weight of 2 decades pressing down on him. His chest felt tight, like every word he wanted to say was caught in his throat. Finally, he broke the silence. "You were right." Juanita tilted her head, her expression steady, waiting. "I thought winning was everything," Michael continued. "That as long as I kept stacking rings, kept building the brand, kept being Michael Jordan, it would mean I was giving my family the best life possible. But I was wrong. I was giving the world everything, and giving you nothing." The honesty hung in the air, raw and unpolished. Michael Jordan, who had spent a lifetime crafting perfection, was allowing himself to be imperfect. Juanita's eyes softened, though her voice stayed firm. "I didn't need the world, Michael. I just needed you, the man, not the myth." Michael swallowed hard. He remembered the nights she used to sit at the end of the couch, waiting for him to come home. He remembered the look in her eyes when he chose practice over dinner, media over family, the game over her. It wasn't anger that haunted him now, it was the quiet hurt. "I know," he said finally. His voice broke slightly. "And that's the part I'll never forgive myself for." Juanita let out a breath. Not sharp, not bitter, but tired. "It took me years to stop being angry, years to stop asking why I wasn't enough to compete with the game. But somewhere along the way I realized it wasn't about me. It was about you, about the shadow you were chasing. And nothing I did could make you stop." Her words weren't laced with blame anymore. They carried acceptance, a truth she had lived with for years. Michael's gaze dropped. The man who had once stood taller than life now seemed smaller, humbled. "I wish I'd seen it sooner. I wish I'd chosen differently." Juanita's lips curved into the faintest smile, not one of joy, but of grace. "We can't rewrite the past. And honestly, I wouldn't want to. We had our time, Michael. A beautiful time. And then it ended. That doesn't erase what was real." Her words pierced him, but they also soothed something deep inside. For years, he had carried guilt like a secret injury, pretending it didn't slow him down. Now, for the first time, he felt the wound begin to heal. He stepped closer, his voice low, almost pleading. "Do you ever think about what it could have been? If I had been different?" Juanita met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. "Of course I do. But then I remember we were exactly who we were meant to be. And maybe tonight isn't about what could have been. Maybe it's about finally letting go of what was." Michael's throat tightened. The words landed heavy, but they carried a strange kind of freedom. The orchestra in the ballroom swelled again, laughter spilling into the hallway. Life outside their moment continued, but here, in this quiet space, time seemed to bend. Juanita glanced toward the doors, then back at him. Her expression softened just enough to let him see the woman he had once loved. Not the myth, not the icon, but the man who had been hers once. "Michael," she said gently, "it's okay. You don't have to carry this forever." And for the first time in 2 decades, he felt like maybe she was right. White heavy check mark, 603 words. The dimly lit corridor stretched behind them, quiet and still, like time itself had paused to watch. Beyond the heavy ballroom doors, life carried on. Applause, laughter, the clinking of glasses. But in this corner, only 2 people existed. Michael shifted, his shoulders heavier than they had ever felt. His voice, when he finally spoke, was lower than the city hum beyond the windows. "I used to think regret was weakness, that if I admitted I had it, the world would see me as less than perfect. But standing here now," he shook his head, almost to himself, "regret is the only thing I feel." Juanita studied him, her eyes sharp but not unkind. She had seen this side of him before, not the legend polished for cameras, but the man who, in private, struggled with being human. "You were never weak for caring," she said softly. You were weak for pretending you didn't. Michael's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She was right. She had always had a way of cutting through his armor, of reaching the core he hid even from himself. He stepped closer, his voice thick. Do you know how many nights I thought about calling you? Just to hear your voice, to ask how you were, to tell you I was sorry. But every time I told myself it was too late, that you'd moved on, that I had no right. Juanita's lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. Instead, she looked at him with an expression that was unreadable, somewhere between pain and compassion. Michael pressed on. I could win championships. I could silence critics. I could build an empire. But the one thing I couldn't do was go back and fix what I broke. His words trembled at the edges, and for a moment, even the man who had been called unshakable felt like he might break. Juanita finally exhaled, her voice calm but laced with truth. Do you think I didn't wonder too, Michael? Do you think I didn't ask myself every day if I gave up too soon? If I should have fought harder for us? Her voice grew quieter, her eyes misting. I replayed it in my head 1,000 times. The arguments, the silences, the nights you came home but weren't really there. I asked myself if I failed you, or if I failed us. Michael's heart clenched. The thought of her carrying that burden cut deeper than anything he'd imagined. No, he said firmly, his voice breaking into a whisper. You didn't fail. I did. I was chasing something I thought was bigger than us, but the truth is, nothing ever was. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with years of unspoken truths, of words buried too deep to surface until now. Juanita blinked, steadying herself. Michael, we can't rewrite the past. And even if we could, we aren't the same people anymore. You're not the young man with the world ahead of him, and I'm not the woman waiting at home. Her tone wasn't harsh, it was real. Michael nodded slowly. I know, but sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if I had just chosen differently. If I had chosen you. The words hung between them like a confession, raw and bare. Juanita's expression softened, and for the first time that night, her eyes truly glistened. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she let the weight of his words settle in the air, until finally, she whispered, maybe that's the hardest part, knowing we'll never know. Michael inhaled sharply, his chest aching with the truth of it. And for a moment, the man who had conquered the world felt utterly powerless. Standing in front of the one person who had ever truly known him, realizing that some victories were never meant to be won. The silence between them lingered like smoke, thick with everything they had just confessed. Michael shifted, his broad frame seeming smaller now, stripped of the invincibility the world always saw in him. Juanita, still poised in her crimson gown, looked at him not as a legend, not as the icon the cameras worshipped outside those doors, but as the man she once loved, flawed, human, vulnerable. She spoke first. Michael, maybe we'll never know what could have been, but that doesn't erase what was. What we had was real. It mattered. Michael swallowed hard. His throat felt dry, but his voice carried a sincerity he hadn't let anyone hear in years. I didn't say it enough back then. Maybe I never said it the way you deserved. But you mattered more than I ever let myself admit. You always did. For the first time all evening, Juanita's expression softened. The wall she had held so firmly seemed to ease, just slightly, enough to let him see the woman beneath the armor. Do you know what the hardest part was, Michael? It wasn't losing the marriage. It was knowing that you never truly saw how much I believed in you. Not the player, not the brand, but the man. Her voice cracked just enough to betray the strength she'd carried for so long. Michael stepped closer, his voice low. I see it now. I see you. And maybe that's 20 years too late, but I need you to know it. The words, simple yet heavy, landed with a finality neither of them could deny. For the first time in 2 decades, there was no anger, no defensiveness, no pretending. Only truth. Juanita let out a long breath, almost a release, like she had been carrying a weight that was no longer hers to hold. Maybe that's all I ever needed to hear. They stood in silence, looking at one another, not as enemies of the past, not even as strangers reunited, but as two people who had once shared a life. The ballroom noise swelled behind the doors, reminding them that the world was still waiting, watching. Michael straightened, the composure of the legend slowly returning, but not as armor, as choice. Whatever happens from here, Juanita, thank you. For tonight. For everything. She gave a small, graceful nod. Goodbye, Michael. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't final. It was respectful. As Michael turned and began walking back toward the lights, the whispers of the crowd already stirring again, he realized something. The championships, the trophies, the accolades, none of it compared to this quiet moment of truth. For the first time in 20 years, he felt a piece of peace. And for those who had watched the legend their whole lives, they were reminded of something important. Even heroes carry regrets. Even icons seek closure. Some stories don't end with a trophy. They end with truth. What did you feel watching Michael and Juanita finally face each other after 20 years? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because more untold stories like this are coming your way.